The sun hung low over the Montana Territory in the autumn of 1882, painting the endless prairie in shades of amber and gold. Sam McKenzie stood on the wooden porch of his modest ranch house, coffee mug in hand, watching the horizon as he did every evening. At 32, Sam had built his life around routine and solitude. His ranch, the Double M, stretched across 1,500 acres of some of the finest grazing land in the Yellowstone Valley, but it might as well have been a fortress for how isolated he kept himself. The sound of thundering hooves broke the evening stillness. Sam squinted against the dying light, making out a lone rider approaching at breakneck speed. Even from a distance, he could see something was wrong. The horse was running wild, its rider barely hanging on. "Whoa there," Sam called out, setting down his mug and stepping off the porch, but his words were lost in the wind. The horse, a beautiful chestnut mare, stumbled just 50 yards from Sam's front gate. The rider woman, Sam realized with shock, was thrown from the saddle with brutal force. She hit the hard-packed earth with a sickening thud, and lay motionless, her long auburn hair spilling across the dusty ground like spilled wine. Sam ran to her side, his heart pounding. She was young, perhaps 25, with delicate features now pale as porcelain. Blood trickled from a gash on her forehead, and her left arm was bent at an unnatural angle. Her breathing was shallow, barely perceptible. Ma'am, can you hear me?" Sam knelt beside her, careful not to move her. Her eyelids fluttered but didn't open. The woman wore a practical riding dress of deep blue wool, well-made but dusty from travel. A small leather satchel had fallen nearby, its contents scattered. Sam gathered the items: a few coins, a dig of an elderly couple, and a letter addressed to Miss Catherine Morgan, CO Western Union, Helena, Montana Territory. Catherine, even unconscious, she was the most beautiful woman Sam had ever seen. Sam knew he had to act fast. Doc Morrison lived in town, 8 miles away, but Catherine needed help now. With infinite care, Sam lifted her from the ground. She was lighter than he expected, her body limp in his arms. He carried her into his house and laid her on his own bed, the only proper bed in the modest ranch house. Sam had seen his share of injuries during his years as a ranch hand and briefly as a cavalry scout, but this looked bad. Catherine's breathing was growing more labored, and the blood from her head wound wouldn't stop flowing despite his efforts to staunch it. With clean cloths, he saddled his fastest horse and rode hard to town, the 8 miles feeling like 80. Doc Morrison's house was dark when Sam arrived, but he pounded on the door until the elderly physician appeared, grumbling and disheveled. "Doc, I need you to come with me. There's been an accident." Dr. Ezra Morrison was pushing 70, with wild gray hair and spectacles that perpetually slid down his nose. He'd been the only doctor in the area for nearly 20 years, and Sam had never seen him rattled, until now. The ride back to the ranch seemed to take forever. When they arrived, Catherine was exactly as Sam had left her, still and pale on his bed. Doc Morrison immediately began his examination, his weathered hands surprisingly gentle as he checked her pulse, her breathing, her injuries. After what felt like hours, Doc Morrison straightened up, his expression grim. He pulled Sam aside, away from the bedside. "I won't lie to you, Sam, she's in bad shape. That head wound is serious, and I suspect there's internal bleeding. Her left arm is definitely broken, probably in 2 places, but the real concern is the head injury. She hasn't regained consciousness, and—" He paused, removing his spectacles to clean them, a gesture Sam recognized as the doctor's way of buying time before delivering bad news. "What is it, Doc? She won't make it through the night." "I'm sorry, Sam. I've seen injuries like this before. The best thing you can do is make her comfortable and try to find her family. There's nothing more medical science can do for her now." Sam felt as if he'd been punched in the gut. "There has to be something, some treatment. Some I've done. All I can—" Set the arm, cleaned and stitched the head wound, given her laudanum for the pain. But Sam, her skull may be fractured. Even if she were in a hospital back east, the outcome would likely be the same. Doc Morrison packed his instruments with the weary efficiency of a man who'd delivered too much bad news over the years. "I'll come back tomorrow to check on her, but—" He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. After the doctor left, Sam sat in the chair he'd pulled up beside his bed, staring at Catherine's pale face in the lamplight. Her breathing was so shallow he had to lean close to make sure she was still alive. The silence of the ranch house, usually comforting, now felt oppressive. Sam tried to make sense of what had happened. Who was Catherine Morgan? Where had she been riding to? And why was she traveling alone? The letter in her satchel was sealed. but the return address showed it was from someone named Thomas Morgan in St. Louis. Her father, perhaps, or a brother. As the night wore on, Sam found himself talking to her, though she gave no sign of hearing. "I don't know who you are, Miss Morgan, but you're safe here. I won't let anything happen to you, I promise." His voice was rough with emotion he didn't fully understand. Doc Morrison might be wrong. He's a good doctor, but he's been wrong before. You just need to fight. Whatever brought you to Montana, whatever you were running to or from, it can wait. You just need to fight. The lamp flickered as the oil burned low. Sam trimmed the wick and refilled it, determined to keep the light burning through the night. Outside, the wind had picked up, rattling the windows and sending tumbleweeds skittering across the yard. Autumn was giving way to winter in Montana, and the nights were getting cold. Sam banked the fire in the fireplace and pulled an extra blanket over Catherine. Her skin was cool to the touch, too cool. He found himself checking her pulse constantly, each time fearing it would be weaker than before. Near midnight, something changed. Catherine's breathing became even more labored, and she began to murmur words Sam couldn't understand. Her head moved restlessly on the pillow, and her uninjured hand clutched at the blankets. "Easy now," Sam said softly, taking her hand in his. Her fingers were ice cold. "You're safe. Just rest." To his amazement, her grip tightened slightly around his hand. It was the first response she'd shown since the accident. Hope flared in Sam's chest, quickly tempered by the memory of Doc Morrison's grim prognosis. The hours crawled by. Sam dozed fitfully in his chair, jerking awake every few minutes to check on Catherine. Twice he thought she'd stopped breathing altogether, and twice he felt the overwhelming relief of feeling a faint pulse at her throat. As dawn approached, painting the eastern sky a pale pink, Catherine's breathing seemed to stabilize slightly. The deathly pallor in her cheeks was replaced by the faintest hint of color. Sam hardly dared to hope, but something deep in his gut told him she was going to survive the night. When Doc Morrison returned the next morning, his surprise was evident. "Well, I'll be damned," he muttered, checking Catherine's pulse and breathing. "She's stronger than she looked. Still critical, mind you," but he trailed off, unwilling to voice optimism that might prove false. "She's going to make it, isn't she, Doc?" "Maybe, Sam, just maybe, but she's got a long road ahead of her. That head injury means she could wake up different than she was before. Memory loss, personality changes, who knows? And she's going to need constant care for weeks, maybe months." Sam looked down at Catherine's peaceful face. Her auburn hair spread across his pillow like silk. "Then that's what she'll get." 3 days passed before Catherine Morgan opened her eyes. Sam had barely left her side, surviving on catnaps in his chair, and the meals his neighbors brought when word of the accident spread through the valley. Martha Hensley, the preacher's wife, had appointed herself Catherine's unofficial nurse, arriving each morning with fresh bandages and strong opinions about proper sickroom protocol. A young unmarried woman staying in a bachelor's house, Martha had clucked disapprovingly. "It just isn't proper, Samuel McKenzie. Would you rather I left her to die in the dirt, Martha?" Sam had replied, his patience worn thin by 3 sleepless nights. Martha had huffed but continued her ministrations, secretly impressed by Sam's devotion to a complete stranger. When Catherine's eyes finally fluttered open on that 3rd morning, Sam was alone with her, spooning broth between her lips as he'd been doing every few hours. One moment she was unconscious, the next she was staring at him with confused green eyes. "Where, double quotes," she began, her voice barely a whisper. "Easy now," Sam said softly, setting down the spoon. "You're safe. You had an accident. Your horse threw you in front of my ranch." Catherine tried to sit up and immediately winced, her hand going to her bandaged head. "My head, it hurts so much." "Doc Morrison says that's to be expected. You hit the ground pretty hard. Do you remember anything about what happened?" Catherine's brow furrowed as she struggled to recall. "I was riding. There was something in the road, a snake maybe." Duchess reared up and the memory seemed to slip away from her like water through her fingers. "Duchess, my horse, is she?" "She's fine, spooked, but unharmed. She's in my stable." Relief flooded Catherine's face, followed quickly by embarrassment. "I'm so sorry. I don't even know your name, and here you are taking care of me like family. Sam McKenzie, and don't apologize. Anyone would have done the same." But even as he said it, Sam knew it wasn't true. Not everyone would have stayed up for 3 nights running, holding the hand of a stranger and praying she'd live to see another sunrise. Over the following days, Catherine's strength slowly returned, but her memory remained frustratingly incomplete. She knew her name and that she'd come from St. Louis, but the details of her journey and her reasons for traveling to Montana remained cloudy. "I have family in Helena," she said one afternoon as Sam helped her sit up to eat some of Martha's chicken soup. "At least, I think I do. It's all so jumbled." Sam had found the letter among her scattered belongings, and after much internal debate, he'd opened it. The contents had surprised him. It was from her brother Thomas, informing her that their father had died and left her a small inheritance. But more importantly, it warned her about their stepmother's intentions to contest the will and advised Catherine to come to Montana to claim what was rightfully hers. "This might help," Sam said, handing her the letter. "I'm sorry I opened it, but I was trying to find out who to contact about your accident." Catherine read the letter twice, her face growing paler with each word. "Papa's dead," she whispered, "and I can't even remember leaving St. Louis. What kind of daughter forgets her own father's death?" "The kind who got kicked in the head by a horse," Sam said gently. "Doc Morrison says the memories might come back gradually. Don't push yourself." But Catherine was already struggling to get out of bed, her movements weak but determined. "I have to get to Helena. If what Thomas says is true, then Margaret, my stepmother, is probably already trying to claim everything Papa left me." "Whoa there," Sam said, steadying her as she swayed on her feet. "You can barely stand, let alone travel. Helena's 2 days, hard riding from here, and that's for someone in perfect health. I don't have a choice. If I wait too long, if you leave now, you'll likely die on the trail. Then Margaret gets everything anyway." The logic was irrefutable, but Sam could see the frustration in Catherine's eyes. She was a woman accustomed to taking care of herself, and the enforced helplessness of her situation clearly chafed at her independent spirit. "How long?" she asked finally. "Doc Morrison thinks at least another 2 weeks before you should even consider traveling, maybe longer." 2 weeks. Catherine sank back onto the bed, overwhelmed by the impossibility of her situation. She was trapped by her own body's weakness, dependent on the kindness of a stranger, while her stepmother potentially stole her inheritance. Sam seemed to sense her despair. "I could ride to Helena for you, talk to a lawyer, make sure your interests are protected until you're well enough to travel." Catherine looked up at him in surprise. "You would do that? For someone you barely know?" The question hung in the air. Between them, Sam found himself studying her face, the determined set of her jaw, the worry lines around her green eyes, the way she held herself despite her obvious pain. When had he started caring so much about a woman he'd known for less than a week? "Yes," he said simply. "I would." But Catherine shook her head. "I can't ask you to leave your ranch, your cattle. Besides, this is my problem to solve." "Your problem became my problem the moment you fell in front of my gate," Sam said with surprising intensity. "I've invested too much in keeping you alive to let you throw it all away now." Something in his tone made Catherine look at him more carefully. She saw the dark circles under his eyes, the stubble on his normally clean-shaven jaw, the rumpled state of his clothes. He looked like a man who'd been to hell and back. "You haven't been sleeping, have you?" she asked softly. Sam shrugged, uncomfortable with her scrutiny. "I sleep enough. In that chair, the bed's yours until you're well." "And where have you been?" "Sleeping since I arrived." When Sam didn't answer, Catherine felt a warmth spread through her chest that had nothing to do with fever. This rough, taciturn rancher had given up his own bed, his own comfort, to care for a complete stranger. How long had it been since anyone had shown her such selfless kindness? "Mr. McKenzie, Sam, I don't know how to thank you." "Get well," he said gruffly. "That's thanks enough." But as the days passed, gratitude evolved into something deeper and more complex. Catherine found herself looking forward to Sam's quiet presence during her long hours of recovery. He would sit by her bedside in the evenings, reading aloud from his small collection of books or simply talking about life on the ranch. His voice was soothing, with a slight drawl that spoke of years spent under the vast Montana sky. Sam, for his part, was discovering emotions he'd thought buried forever. The ranch that had once felt like a sanctuary now seemed incomplete without Catherine's presence. Her laugh, when it came, was like music in the too-quiet house. Her questions about his life, his dreams, his reasons for choosing such an isolated existence, made him examine himself in ways he'd avoided for years. One evening, as October gave way to November and the first snow began to fall, Catherine asked him the question he'd been dreading. "What happened to make you choose such a solitary life?" Sam was quiet for so long that Catherine thought he wouldn't answer. Finally he spoke, his voice barely above a whisper. "I was married once. Her name was Elizabeth. who had a little spread. Down in Colorado, nothing fancy, but we were happy. Then the fever came through, scarlet fever. Took her and our baby daughter both. I couldn't stay there after that. Too many memories. Catherine's hand found his in the lamplight. I'm so sorry, it was a long time ago, 7 years now. I came to Montana thinking I wanted to be alone forever. Funny how life has a way of changing your mind when you're not looking. Their eyes met across the small space between bed and chair, and something passed between the man, understanding, a recognition of kindred spirits who had both known loss, and were perhaps ready to know love again. The moment was broken by the sound of hooves in the yard. Sam rose to look out the window, frowning at the unfamiliar rider dismounting near his porch. Expecting someone? Catherine asked. No. Sam's hand moved instinctively to the gun belt hanging on the chair beside the door. Stay quiet. The knock that came was sharp and authoritative. Sam opened the door to find a well-dressed man in his 50s, with cold gray eyes and an expensive coat that marked him as city-bred. Samuel McKenzie. That's right. What can I do for you? My name is James Crawford. I represent Mrs. Margaret Morgan of St. Louis. I believe you have something that belongs to her. Sam's jaw tightened as he studied the man on his porch. James Crawford had the look of a lawyer or a hired gun, maybe both. His expensive clothes and soft hands marked him as someone who did his fighting with words and money rather than fists. But there was something in his cold gray eyes that suggested he wasn't afraid to get his hands dirty when necessary. I'm not sure what you think I have that belongs to your employer, Sam said carefully, keeping his body positioned to block Crawford's view into the house. Crawford smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. Come now, Mr. McKenzie. We both know that Catherine Morgan is here, recovering from her ... accident. Mrs. Morgan is naturally concerned about her stepdaughter's welfare and has sent me to ensure she receives proper care. Miss Morgan is under a doctor's care and recovering well. That's all you need to know. I'm afraid that's not quite sufficient. Crawford reached into his coat, and Sam's hand moved toward his gun, but the man only withdrew a folded document. This is a legal order from the Territorial Court in Helena, signed by Judge Whitman himself. It grants Mrs. Margaret Morgan temporary guardianship over her stepdaughter, given Miss Catherine's impaired mental state following her head injury. Sam scanned the document, his heart sinking. The legal language was complex, but the meaning was clear enough. If Catherine was deemed mentally incompetent due to her head injury, her stepmother could claim guardianship and, by extension, control over her inheritance. This is horseshit, Sam said bluntly. Miss Morgan is perfectly coherent. She suffered some memory loss, but she's far from incompetent. That's for the court to decide, isn't it? Now, if you're just what's going on. Both men turned to see Catherine standing in the doorway, wrapped in one of Sam's wool coats. She was pale and clearly weak, but her green eyes were sharp and alert as they fixed on Crawford. Miss Morgan, Crawford said, his voice taking on an oily, solicitous tone. I'm James Crawford, representing your stepmother. She's been beside herself with worries since she received word of your accident. Catherine's laugh was bitter. I'm sure she has been, worried that I might live long enough to claim my inheritance. Crawford's expression didn't change, but Sam caught the flash of calculation in his eyes. Your stepmother is only concerned with your welfare. This harsh frontier life is no place for a woman in your condition. She's arranged for you to return to St. Louis, where you can receive proper medical care. Under her guardianship, I assume. Catherine stepped fully onto the porch, despite Sam's restraining hand on her arm. Tell me, Mr. Crawford, what exactly does my stepmother plan to do with my father's estate while I single quotes recovering? Why, preserve it for you. Naturally, Mrs. Morgan is a prudent woman who understands financial management far better than a woman with a head injury. Catherine's voice was steady, but Sam could see the tremor in her hands. How convenient that Margaret's concern for my welfare coincides so perfectly with her desire to control my inheritance. Crawford's mask of concern began to slip. Miss Morgan, you're clearly not thinking clearly. This injury has affected your judgment. My judgment is fine, Catherine interrupted. What's affected is my patience for my stepmother's greed. Nevertheless, the court order is quite clear. You're to come with me immediately. Like hell she is. Both Crawford and Catherine turned to look at Sam, surprised by the quiet intensity in his voice. The rancher stepped forward, placing himself between Catherine and the lawyer. Miss Morgan is recovering from serious injuries and is in no condition to travel. Any doctor will confirm that moving her now could be dangerous, possibly fatal. The document specifies that medical concerns are secondary to the document, Sam said, his voice dropping to a dangerous growl. Can go straight to hell. You're not taking her anywhere. Crawford's hand moved inside his coat again, but this time Sam was ready. His Colt appeared in his hand with practiced speed. The barrel pointed steadily at Crawford's chest. I wouldn't, if I were you. For a long moment, the two men stared at each other across the porch. Finally, Crawford slowly withdrew his empty hand and smoothed down his coat. This is kidnapping, Mr. McKenzie. You're interfering with a legal court order. This is protecting an injured woman from being dragged across the territory against her will and her doctor's orders. Big difference. Crawford's smile returned, colder than before. Very well, but understand this: Mrs. Morgan has resources and influence. She can make life very difficult for those who oppose her interests. Let her try. After Crawford rode away, Sam holstered his gun and turned to find Catherine staring at him with an expression he couldn't quite read. You realize what you've just done? She asked quietly. I've kept you safe. Same thing I've been doing since you fell off that horse. Sam, you could go to jail for this. That court order was signed by a judge who's probably never seen you in his life, based on the word of a woman who stands to profit from declaring you incompetent. Sam's jaw was set in stubborn lines. I won't let them take you, not like this. Catherine felt tears spring to her eyes, stares of gratitude, fear, and something else she was afraid to name. Why are you doing this? Why are you risking everything for someone you barely know? Sam was quiet for a long moment, staring out at the darkening sky. Maybe because I've been alone so long I'd forgotten what it felt like to have someone worth protecting. Or maybe because I can see in your eyes that you're not the kind of woman who gives up without a fight, and I'll be damned if I let them break that spirit. And maybe, Catherine said softly, because we're not strangers anymore. Their eyes met, and in that moment, both of them acknowledged what had been growing between them over the weeks of her recovery. It wasn't just gratitude or loneliness, it was something deeper, stronger, and infinitely more dangerous given their circumstances. The spell was broken by the sound of approaching hooves. Multiple horses this time. Sam's hand moved to his gun again as he counted at least 6 riders coming toward the ranch in the gathering dusk. Get inside, he told Catherine, and stay away from the windows. But Catherine didn't move. If you're making a stand, you're not making it alone. Catherine, it's my fight. Sam, my inheritance, my life, my choice, and I choose to fight. The riders pulled up in front of the house, and Sam recognized the lead figure with a mixture of relief and apprehension. Sheriff Tom Bradley was a fair man, but he was also a man who followed the law, even when he didn't like it. Sam, Bradley called out, remaining mounted. I think you know why I'm here. I can guess. Crawford filed a complaint, says you threatened him with a gun and are holding Miss Morgan against her will. Miss Morgan is free to speak for herself, Sam replied. Catherine stepped forward, her chin raised defiantly despite her obvious weakness. Sheriff Bradley, I am Catherine Morgan, and I am here of my own free will. Mr. McKenzie has quite literally saved my life, and I will not be dragged away by my stepmother's hired thugs simply because she wants to steal my inheritance. Bradley studied her carefully. Miss Morgan, I have a court order here that says you're not competent to make such decisions. Then the court is wrong, Catherine said firmly. I may have some gaps in my memory, but I know exactly what my stepmother is trying to do, and I know exactly why she's doing it. That may be so, but the law is the law. I'm going to have to ask you to come with me. Sheriff, Sam interjected. Doc Morrison will testify that moving Miss Morgan now could endanger her life. Doesn't that count for something? Bradley looked uncomfortable. Sam, you know I don't like this any more than you do, but I can't ignore a court order. If Miss Morgan has a grievance, she can take it up with the judge in Helena. If Margaret gets her hands on me, I'll never make it to Helena, Catherine said. At least, not in any condition to fight for what's rightfully mine. The sheriff was quiet for a long moment, clearly wrestling with his conscience. Finally, he made his decision. Miss Morgan, I'm going to give you a choice. You can come with me now, voluntarily, and I'll make sure you're treated fairly and get proper legal representation in Helena, or I can come back tomorrow with a federal marshal and enough men to take you by force. Either way, that court order is going to be enforced. Catherine felt the walls closing in around her. She was trapped between her stepmother's legal machinations and the federal authorities who had no choice but to enforce them. But as she stood there on Sam's porch, wrapped in his coat and supported by his unwavering presence, she realized she wasn't as powerless as she'd thought. Sheriff, she said slowly, what if I told you I had new evidence about my stepmother's motives? Evidence that might change how the court views this guardianship. Bradley perked up. What kind of evidence? Catherine looked at Sam, who nodded encouragingly. The kind that might interest the federal authorities in St. Louis. The kind that involves mail fraud, forgery, and conspiracy to defraud. It was a bluff, but it was based on Catherine's growing certainty that Margaret had done more than simply petition for guardianship. Her stepmother was too well prepared, too confident, for this to be a spur-of-the-moment grab for money. This had been planned, carefully and thoroughly. I'll need more than accusations, Miss Morgan. Then give me time to gather proof. 1 week, Sheriff. Give me 1 week to recover enough to travel and to put together the evidence that will expose what Margaret is really doing. Bradley considered this, clearly torn between his duty and his instincts. 1 week, he said finally. But Miss Morgan, if you try to run, I'll hunt you down myself. And Sam, if you help her disappear, you'll be looking at federal charges. After the sheriff and his men rode away, Sam and Catherine stood together on the porch, both knowing that the temporary reprieve only delayed the inevitable confrontation. Do you really have evidence against your stepmother? Sam asked. Catherine's smile was grim. Not yet, but I will. The week that followed was a whirlwind of activity and growing desperation. Catherine threw herself into piecing together her fragmented memories and the puzzle of her stepmother's schemes, while Sam found himself falling deeper in love with a woman he might lose forever. Catherine's memories had been returning in bits and pieces, triggered by familiar scents, sounds, or emotions. The smell of Sam's coffee brought back mornings in her father's study, where she'd helped him with his business correspondence. The sound of cattle lowing reminded her of the stockyards where her father had made his fortune, and the feeling of safety she experienced in Sam's presence brought back memories of her father's protective love and how it had changed after he married Margaret. She started small, Catherine explained to Sam as they sat by the fire on the 4th night of their reprieve. Little suggestions about how Papa should handle his investments, questions about why he was leaving so much to his ungrateful daughter who'd moved away from home. Sam watched her face in the firelight, noting how her green eyes blazed with anger and determination. Her strength was returning daily, along with her memories, and he was struck again by her beauty, not just physical, but the beauty of her spirit, her refusal to be broken by those who would prey on her vulnerability. Margaret was smart about it, Catherine continued. She never openly criticized me, just planted seeds of doubt. Made Papa think I was selfish for moving to Kansas to teach school instead of staying home to take care of him. You were a teacher, Catherine nodded. For 3 years, in a little town called Mill. I loved it, the children, the independence, the feeling that I was making a difference. But Margaret convinced Papa that I was abandoning him, choosing strangers over family. Is that why you came back to St. Louis? Papa got sick, or so Margaret claimed in her letters. She said he was asking for me, that he might not have long to live. So I gave up my position and came home. Catherine's voice grew bitter. Of course, when I arrived, Papa seemed perfectly healthy. Margaret claimed he'd recovered miraculously upon hearing I was coming home. Sam could see the pieces falling into place. She isolated you, completely. Made it seem unnatural for me to want to return to teaching. Convinced Papa that I was needed at home, and then, gradually, she started suggesting that I wasn't quite stable, that living alone had affected my nerves, that I was becoming eccentric and unreliable. How long did this go on? Almost 2 years. By the time Papa actually did get sick, really sick, I had no friends left, no independence, no life outside that house. Margaret had convinced everyone, including Papa, that I was a fragile spinster who needed constant supervision. Sam felt a burning anger toward a woman he'd never met. And when your father died, I wasn't even allowed to see him in his final days. Margaret said the doctor feared the shock might send me into hysterics. Catherine's voice broke slightly. I never got to say goodbye. Never got to tell him that I forgave him for believing her lies. Sam reached for her hand, and she gripped his fingers tightly. But you escaped. You got the letter from your brother and got away. Thomas helped me. He never believed Margaret's stories about my mental state. But he was away at university most of the time, then working in Chicago. When Papa died and he came home for the funeral, he could see what was happening. He helped me gather what money I could and slip away in the night. And Margaret's been chasing you ever since. She can't let me get away, Sam. If I can prove that I'm mentally competent, that her claims of my instability were lies, then her guardianship petition falls apart. And without that, she has no legal claim to Papa's estate. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching the flames dance in the fireplace. Outside, Snow was falling steadily, a reminder that winter was coming fast to Montana territory. Soon the passes would be blocked, travel would become dangerous, and Catherine would be trapped here until spring if the authorities allowed her to stay. "What will you do if Sheriff Bradley comes back?" Sam asked. Catherine was quiet for a long moment. "I've been thinking about that. Running won't solve anything. Margaret has resources and connections, and she'll just keep hunting me. But if I go back to Helena to fight this guardianship, I'll be walking into a trap. So what's the third option?" Catherine turned to look at him, her heart pounding as she prepared to voice the thought that had been growing in her mind for days. "I could stay here, permanently." Sam's breath caught. "Catherine, ... I know it's presumptuous, I know I'm asking too much. But Sam, these past weeks, taking care of me, talking with me, just being together, ... haven't you felt it too?" "Felt what?" But Sam's voice was rough with emotion, and they both knew he understood exactly what she meant. That maybe we were meant to find each other, that maybe my accident wasn't just bad luck, but fate putting me exactly where I needed to be. Sam stood up abruptly, pacing to the window to stare out at the falling snow. "Catherine, you don't know what you're saying. You've been through trauma, you're grateful for the care you've received, but that's not the same as love." Catherine rose from her chair, moving to stand behind him. "Sam, look at me." Reluctantly, he turned. In the lamplight, her face was luminous with certainty and something deeper. "I love you," she said simply. "Not gratitude, not dependence, not some confused reaction to my injuries. Love, the kind of love that makes everything else in the world seem small and unimportant." Sam's resolve crumbled. "Catherine, I love you too, more than I thought possible, more than I ever loved anyone, including Elizabeth, but love isn't enough. You're an educated woman from the city. What kind of life would you have here, in the middle of nowhere, with a rancher who barely sees another soul from one week to the next?" "I'd have the life I choose, with the man I choose, Sam. I was a teacher in a frontier town. I know what frontier life is like, and I'm not afraid of it. And your inheritance, your father's estate. Are you willing to give up everything your father worked for just to hide from your stepmother?" Catherine moved closer to him, close enough that he could smell the lavender soap Martha Hensley had brought for her hair. "What if I told you there was a way to have both? A way to claim my inheritance and build a life here with you?" Before Sam could respond, the sound of a single horse approaching cut through the night. Both of them tensed, but the rider called out in a familiar voice, "Sam, it's Doc Morrison. I need to talk to you both." Sam opened the door to find the elderly doctor covered in snow and clearly agitated. "Doc, what's wrong? It's past midnight. I've been riding since sundown. There's news from Helena, and it's not good." Doc Morrison stomped the snow off his boots and accepted the cup of coffee Catherine pressed into his hands. "I was in town when the telegram came through. That lawyer Crawford has been busy. He's convinced Judge Whitman to issue a federal warrant for your arrest." Sam's jaw tightened. "On what charges?" "Kidnapping, interference with a federal court order, unlawful restraint." Doc Morrison shook his head grimly. "They're saying you're holding Miss Catherine against her will and preventing the lawful execution of her guardianship order." "That's ridiculous," Catherine protested. "I'm here voluntarily. I'll testify to that." "Won't matter if they declare you incompetent to testify," Doc Morrison said. "And that's exactly what they're planning to do. Crawford's brought in a doctor from St. Louis, some fancy specialist who's prepared to swear that head injuries like yours always result in permanent mental impairment." Catherine felt the blood drain from her face. "They can do that. Just have some doctor declare me insane without even examining me. In territorial court, with the right judge and enough money changing hands. Unfortunately, yes." Sam was already moving, pulling his gun belt from its peg and checking his rifle. "Then we run. Tonight, before they can serve the warrant." "Sam, no." Catherine caught his arm. "Running will only make you look guilty. There has to be another way." Doc Morrison cleared his throat. "Actually, there might be, but you're not going to like it." Both Sam and Catherine turned to look at him expectantly. "Marry her, Sam." The words hung in the air like a physical presence. Sam stared at the doctor as if he'd lost his mind. "What?" "Think about it." Doc Morrison pressed on. "If Catherine is married, her husband becomes her legal guardian, not her stepmother. And as her husband, you'd have the legal right to make decisions about her medical care and her competency." "Doc, that's..." Sam began. "Brilliant," Catherine finished. "Doc, you're absolutely right. If I'm married, Margaret's guardianship petition becomes invalid." "Now hold on," Sam protested. "You can't just marry someone to escape a legal problem. Marriage is ... It's supposed to be ... based on love. Catherine's eyes were bright with hope and determination. Sam, you just told me you love me, and I love you. The legal benefits would just be ... practical. Sam looked between Catherine and Doc Morrison, feeling like the world was spinning out of control. This is crazy. We've known each other for 3 weeks, and in those 3 weeks, you've shown me more kindness, more genuine care, than I received in 2 years living in my stepmother's house. Catherine said, Sam, I meant what I said earlier. I want to stay here, to build a life with you. This just makes it possible. Doc Morrison nodded approvingly. I can perform the ceremony right now, if you want. I'm ordained, been marrying folks in this territory for 15 years. Right now, Sam's voice cracked slightly. The federal marshals will be here by tomorrow afternoon at the latest, Doc Morrison warned. If you're going to do this, it has to be tonight. Catherine took Sam's hands in hers, looking up into his face with complete trust. Sam McKenzie, will you marry me? For a moment, Sam was transported back 7 years, to another proposal, another woman. But where Elizabeth's memory once brought only pain, now it brought a strange sense of peace, as if she were giving him permission to love again. Catherine Morgan, he said softly, I'd be honored to be your husband. The ceremony was simple, conducted by lamplight in Sam's modest living room. Doc Morrison's words were brief but heartfelt, speaking of love, commitment, and the bonds that tied 2 souls together through whatever hardships life might bring. When Sam slipped his mother's simple gold band onto Catherine's finger, the same ring he'd removed from Elizabeth's hand 7 years ago, it felt not like a betrayal of the past, but like a promise for the future. You may kiss your bride, Doc Morrison said with a smile. Sam's kiss was gentle, reverent, tasting of coffee and promises and the sweet possibility of happiness. When they broke apart, Catherine's eyes were bright with tears. Well, Mrs. McKenzie, Sam said softly, I guess you're stuck with me now. I can think of worse fates, Catherine replied, laughing through her tears. Doc Morrison packed up his Bible and prepared to leave. I'll file the marriage certificate first thing in the morning, and I'll make sure Sheriff Bradley knows about it before the federal marshals arrive. It should complicate things significantly for your stepmother's lawyer. After the doctor left, Sam and Catherine sat together by the dying fire, still somewhat stunned by the rapid turn of events. Do you regret it? Sam asked quietly. Catherine considered the question seriously. Ask me again in 50 years. I might not be around in 50 years. I'm 7 years older than you. Then I guess we'd better make the most of whatever time we have. Sam pulled her closer, marveling at how perfectly she fit against his side. Your stepmother isn't going to give up easily. This marriage might stop the guardianship, but she'll find other ways to come after your inheritance. Let her try, Catherine said firmly. I'm not the same frightened girl who ran away from St. Louis. I have allies now, a husband who believes in me, and the determination to fight for what's mine. What will you do about the inheritance? Catherine was quiet for a moment, thinking, I'll write to Thomas, have him gather documentation about Margaret's lies and manipulate. With his testimony and mine, we should be able to prove that the guardianship petition was based on false information, and once I'm established as competent, I can pursue Papa's estate through the proper legal channels. And if we lose, Catherine turned to look at him, her green eyes serious, then we build our own fortune, Sam. This land, this ranch, it's beautiful, and it has potential. With proper management and expansion, it could be quite profitable. Sam raised an eyebrow. Listen to you, talking like a businesswoman. I am a businesswoman, Catherine said with a smile. Or I will be, now that I have a reason to be. Papa taught me about investments and land development before Margaret convinced him I was too delicate for such concerns. I may have been playing the role of helpless invalid for the past 2 years, but I remember everything he taught me. The fire burned lower, casting dancing shadows on the walls. Outside, the snow continued to fall, blanketing the ranch in pristine white. It was peaceful, beautiful, and for the first time since her accident, Catherine felt truly safe. Sam, what would you have done if I'd died that first night? Sam was quiet for so long that Catherine thought he wouldn't answer. Finally, he spoke, his voice rough with emotion. I would have buried you properly, tried to find your family to let them know what happened, and then ... He paused, struggling with the words. I think I would have regretted for the rest of my life not knowing who you were, not having the chance to know you. Catherine felt tears spring to her eyes. I'm glad you didn't have to find out, so am I. They sat in comfortable silence until the fire burned down to embers. Finally, Sam stirred, preparing to bank the coals for the night. I should let you get some rest, he said. suddenly awkward. You can have the bed. Of course, I'll Sam. Catherine's voice was soft but certain. We're married now. The simple words carried a wealth of meaning. Sam looked at her, seeing, not the injured stranger he'd rescued weeks ago, but the strong, intelligent, beautiful woman who had chosen to bind her life to his. Are you sure? He asked. Instead of answering with words, Catherine rose from her chair and extended her hand. To him, Sam took it, allowing her to lead him toward the bedroom, their bedroom now. The next morning brought crisp, clear skies and the sound of multiple horses approaching the ranch. Sam and Catherine dressed quickly and stepped onto the porch to find Sheriff Bradley, 2 federal marshals, and James Crawford waiting in the yard. Sam, Bradley called out, his expression grim. I'm afraid I have a warrant for your arrest. I'm afraid that warrant is no longer valid, Sheriff, Catherine replied, stepping forward with her chin raised proudly. I'd like you to meet my husband, Samuel McKenzie. We were married last night by Dr. Morrison. Crawford's face went white, then red with fury. This is obviously a sham marriage, designed to circumvent the court order. Are you questioning the validity of a legal marriage performed by an ordained minister? Catherine's voice was sweetly innocent, but her eyes were steel. How very ... inappropriate. One of the federal marshals, a weathered man in his 50s, looked confused. If they're married, doesn't that change the legal situation? Completely, Sheriff Bradley said, barely concealing his relief. A married woman's legal guardian is her husband, not her stepmother. The guardianship order is null and void. Crawford sputtered protests, threats, and accusations, but the legal facts were clear. The marshals, practical men with no desire to arrest a man for protecting his wife, mounted their horses and prepared to leave. This isn't over, Crawford warned as he climbed back into his saddle. Mrs. Morgan has other resources, other avenues of legal recourse. I'm sure she does, Catherine replied calmly. But now she'll be fighting Catherine McKenzie, not a defenseless orphan. And I have resources too, starting with a husband who believes in me. After the men rode away, Sam and Catherine stood together on their porch, watching the sun climb higher over their land. So, Mrs. McKenzie, Sam said, slipping his arm around his wife's waist, what do you want to do first? Catherine leaned into his embrace, feeling the solid strength of him, the warmth of his love, and the infinite possibilities of their future together. Everything, she said simply. I want to do everything. And as they stood there together, looking out over the vast Montana territory that was now their home, both of them knew that whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them together. Love had indeed conquered all, not just Margaret's schemes and the law's complications, but the loneliness and fear that had haunted them both for too long. Catherine had fallen from her horse in front of Sam's ranch as a broken, hunted woman. She had risen as Catherine McKenzie, wife, partner, and equal, ready to claim not just her inheritance, but the rich, full life she had always deserved. The doctor had been wrong. She had made it after all.